So this video will go over how to tackle cars on the MCAT, and we'll just get started. The first thing that I urge you to do is to identify your weakness and just know what type of questions are you getting wrong the most. And some of the ways you can identify your weakness is through the CARS diagnostic tool or doing the daily Jack Weston passages because those are free and it will help you easily identify where you are going wrong. Then, after you identify that, there are three types of questions. So there's comprehension, reasoning beyond text, and reasoning within text. Comprehension means you're basically just not understanding what the author is trying to say with their point. So you're not catching the exact wording or the tone in the moment. A strategy adjustment that I recommend is just sit there and read the whole passage very intently to give it all your attention and just not write any summaries while anchoring the precise meaning. So, what is the author really saying? It helps to make mental notes of what each paragraph is trying to say and how it is tying to the overall thesis. Another thing is highlighting meaningfully or not highlighting at all. This is just something I hope that you can find a middle ground on. What I've learned is that I like highlighting a lot. I like highlighting important sentences, so the transition sentences that are like, however, or something that indicates the author's tone. I also recommend highlighting names and organizations. So when you have a question that's referring to a certain person or organization mentioned in the passage, you can just look at your highlight, read through it briefly if you need to, or just make sure what your understanding is right or memory is right, click it and move on. Then is reasoning beyond text. For me, this is the most difficult one, and this is the strategy that I had to employ for myself and what I did on the actual MCAT. It's you just understand the text, but you can't apply the ideas to a new scenario. So if the passage is talking about, let's say, something that's a whole and there's different parts of it, so there's a whole, different parts. That's how I imagine it in my head. And if that's the key part of the passage, then the author could write, what is something that's similar to this? And that could be like genus and their species. Just an example. So the strategy for that is avoiding breaking the passage with summaries, just reading it intently, just like comprehension. But then at the end, I write a one sentence summary of the passage, just that says the overall theme, and usually there is a question or two that asks, what is the main idea of the passage? And that's just an easy answer. So you can just pick the one that aligns with your summary. This is, of course, assuming that you do not have a problem with the comprehension of the passage, because if you're also having problem with comprehension, you don't want to write the wrong summary and then continue picking the wrong answers. So for that, you can also employ the reasoning within text strategy. So the reasoning within text is you're not catching the details. You're losing the logic between the flow of ideas. Maybe you get the overall idea, but you're not remembering exactly what the author was saying at one point. So for this, I recommend writing short paragraph summaries to anchor the main argument and the author's stance so you can apply them later. And then the summary should just note the main idea of each passage and include a positive or negative sign if you catch any strong language that includes the author's argument. This is super easy to later identify if a question's asking, how would the author feel about some statement? You just look at your positives and negatives and you see the author's mostly for it. You pick that one and move on. Other problems I've been seeing is timing, reading speed, and vocabulary. So for the timing and reading speed, it will come with either practice or you are just going to have to either spend more time reading intently. So you can spend about 4 to 5 minutes just reading intently and then answering all the questions and the rest of the time without having to go back into the passage. And the other one is vocabulary, where I recommend you start reading some articles or just anything that doesn't interest you, because some of these passages could be too boring and you don't want to only have interest or read something intently that you like. So this is our passage. I will write anything that I would usually write on my sheet in this gridded box as usual, because that's what's actually given on the MCAT. Down here we have the questions. I have written what type of question is each. So if you haven't done it already, this could help you identify which ones are most difficult. For the passage, I will read it myself, highlight it, and I will write out the paragraph summaries and over here, and then I'll write the one sentence summary here. I recommend that you pause it and read it yourself, and then I will restart this video with all the highlighting that I have done, and I'll explain to you why I wrote what summaries and all of that. Okay, I hope you have paused, read, highlighted whatever you needed to. I will go through this passage and show you what I have highlighted and what I have written if you are employing any of these techniques. So, in the first paragraph, we read about how biology was changed, so there was a scientific revolution. And I wrote that a certain 19th century naturalist to see life as it is, unmediated by the demands of theology or allure of romantic metaphors, going past the crazy things, just looking at things as it is. And they're talking about Darwin. So Darwin saw this phenomenon governed by natural processes, so I've highlighted that. Immediate predecessors, the natural theologians has seen the world subjectively, that is confirmed by pre-existing vision of divine order and purpose. So they think that there was an order to things, and they thought that things would fit into that order. So each new discovery was interpreted as another flourish in already completed design. So they did not want to change how they were thinking. But Darwin went past that and saw the reality beneath it, that living forms were a product of gradual change shaped by competition, chance, and adaptation. So I've kind of just highlighted things that have stood out to me, and this came to this summary, which says natural process. I've condensed it. Natural processes is what Darwin's looking at, / as is. So it is as it is. The second paragraph summary, I highlighted the transition sentences in blue for you all to see when to look at those transition sentences. Yet we may ask why, right? Why did Darwin do that? Why did the other people do that? Okay, so there's a long history of studying nature, and it had never occurred before to anyone to interpret the living world as a rigorously naturalistic way. After all attempts to understand life empirically had been made before. And then they give us a bunch of examples, right? The Greeks, the Renaissance anatomists, the Enlightenment thinkers. But these enterprises, though valuable, still carried with them the interpretive burden. They are still interpreting it based on how they want to and not what's in front of them. So that they presume the underlying their observation was purposeful structure, and their work was to reveal it. So they're still trying to find some meaning from it, while Darwin, as we're told in the first paragraph, is just looking at things as it is. And then down here, this says, even when evidence conflicted with this expectation, again, so this is still talking about the predecessors. And sometimes, because they don't say it again and again, we start thinking that maybe they're talking about Darwin, that anomalies were treated as puzzles to be reconciled with a pre-established order, not as clues to an entirely different truth. So this is how the predecessors thought. This is what this paragraph is telling us. So in paragraph 2, I wrote, no pre-existing order and no change. It is important to make your summaries really concise, because then if you keep writing long sentences, because you might want to write like, oh, they thought of this way, they thought of that way, you're going to take too much time, right? So we're just going to do it like that. And even if you want, you could write no change, no different before Darwin. And you can really summarize it however you want, because you're the only one that's going to be reading these summaries. So then we're moving on to the third paragraph. So before Darwin, so we're still talking about his predecessors, in order to reveal such inconsistencies, scholars employed conceptual frameworks that allowed them to correct. Correct is in quotation marks. That shows sarcasm. So they're trying to correct nature. They're trying to push it into this like box that they've already made for it, even if nature doesn't fit into that box. See how I'm making that like connection, that imagery, that they're trying to correct nature. They're trying to make this story out of something that is going to fit what they're thinking. Continuing on, and that's exactly what the next sentence says. Anatomists might redraw a malformed organ to fit the ideal schema of a species, of what they think that species' organs would look like. Because if they just accepted this, then they would have to just throw out their entire framework. Continuing on, another example. Then these frameworks were often ingenious, but they served the mind's preference for coherence over the messy reality of variation. They did not like that things were different. So again, I'm highlighting these things that are just telling me how each person is thinking. And then another example, just as a map can impose neat boundaries whose contours are jagged and shifting, these intellectual devices imposed order when nature offered none. So they're kind of looking at what isn't there. So again, for paragraph 3, I wrote frameworks to correct, and then they loved order. This is just something that helps me. Your summary can look completely different. That's okay, as long as you're getting the main paragraphs, the idea of the paragraph, right? The main idea of the paragraph. And then the last paragraph is, one might conclude from the history of biology that unfiltered reality is elusive, right? That, you can't fit everything in anything, and that every attempt to grasp it becomes entangled in the net of human expectation. But Darwin, so again, it's in blue because this is contradicting to exactly what his predecessors were trying to do. Though well aware of the interpretive habits of his predecessors, refused to concede that nature's raw processes were beyond comprehension. So if we kept going with how the other people did it, we're like, well, we have to make like a million schemas. But Darwin just said it as it is. He aimed to present life as it might appear to an impartial observer, shaped not by ideals, but by the ceaseless interplay of chance and necessity. Honestly, the ending is just, again, restating what was said in the first paragraph. In doing so, he altered not the content of biology, but the very posture in which we approach the living world. He basically changed how we study living forms. So in the last one, I wrote, Darwin does not equal interpretation. Darwin did not do interpretation, just natural processes. And these are just keywords that will help me remember what each paragraph was talking about. Because if you can't remember what each paragraph was talking about, these will help. And let's say you don't want to do this, then here's our summary. Our summary said, Darwin looked at nature as is and did not correct like his predecessors. He changed the course. Again, this is my summary. Your summary can look completely different. Okay, now, as we do these questions, I will try not to go back in the paragraph as much as possible and only look at our summaries and our background knowledge if you have not written any summaries. Okay, either one is fine. I usually did not sometimes because I would have enjoyed a passage so much that I didn't need to. Okay, first question. Information in the passage suggests that the author probably believes. What does the author believe? That the act of correcting nature into a harmonious picture. The author probably believes that the act of correcting nature into a harmonious picture is doing what? What is that sentence adding to the main idea of the paragraph? So, looking at our one sentence summary, and now we'll look at our answer choices. We'll start with elimination because some of these can be eliminated out very easily. So we'll start with A. Was a necessary step towards scientific progress in early centuries. Towards the end, it literally tells us that his predecessors were doing something that did not help as much. So that's not right because Darwin took away what his previous peers were doing. Then B. Obscured genuine insights that might have led to a more accurate understanding. That sounds good to me, so I'm not going to cross that out. Reflected a lack of technical skill among Darwinian scholars. Nothing said, there was no talk about skill. No one said anything about that they were not as skilled. Okay? So we are going to take that out. Was primarily a result of religious interference in science. When did they talk about religion? Like in our summaries, in our one sentence summary, it doesn't talk about religion anywhere. So we're going to take that out. And we're left with B. That is the answer. Number 2. Which of the following statements best summarizes the central thesis of the paragraph? This is what I was talking about earlier. This is the easiest type of questions to have. In this one, we'll look at our one sentence summary. We'll look at which answer choice matches that, and we're gonna pick it and move on. So, A. Darwin's theory of evolution marked the first time biology was approached without pre-existing assumptions about order. What did it say? Looked at nature as it is and did not correct like his predecessors. So that is obviously the answer. But let's say you didn't write the summary and you don't know what it is. The history of biology shows that reality is ultimately unknowable. This is very tempting. This is very tempting to pick because in the passage, we remember elusive, right? That it's getting too entangled into human understanding. But look at the starting, the history of biology. The passage isn't talking about history of biology. The passage is talking about how biology has been looked at. And also, it's not ultimately unknowable because Darwin is looking at it as is, and his predecessors were trying to correct it. So it's a difference in how biology is looked at, right? It's not the history of it. So we're gonna take that out. The work of ancient Renaissance and Enlightenment naturalists directly paved the way for Darwin's discovery. This is also very tempting because there's like 2 paragraphs talking about his predecessors, but nowhere did they say that their work paved the way for Darwin. They're just saying they looked at it in one way and Darwin looked at it a different way. So we're going to take that out. So the central thesis is his naturalistic approach was new and transformative. So no. Darwin was the only scientist who understood the role of variation in life. That's again not true because the others, they probably did understand it, but they wanted it to fit into what they were thinking. So we're going to know that A is definitely right, and we'll pick it and move on. You do not have to, I just want to make a note, you do not have to go through this reasoning for every one of them. If you know for sure A is right, if you're very confident, you can just pick it and move on because it's the obvious choice sometimes, right? Number 3, the author's suggestion that pre-Darwin scholars treated anomalies as puzzles to be reconciled, right? So this is in a paragraph that we know. If you don't remember, you can just go back, look at the keyword puzzle, read around it if you forgot. But because we have a good understanding of the passage, we're going to connect it back to our summary, back to our paragraph summaries, or just our memory, can most reasonably be interpreted to mean that they had not. Please always look at these. They had not. So we're going to pick something that fits that they had not, right? So they had not noticed the existence of anomalies in the natural world. This is wrong. Oh, this is wrong because it says that they did, right? Question, paragraph, whoa, paragraph summary, paragraph 3 summary, oh my gosh, says frameworks to correct and they loved order. They just didn't want to change what they previously believed. So they obviously know that there's anomalies, they just don't want to accept them. Consider the anomalies might contradict their fundamental assumption. That is literally what I just said. And that's what our paragraph summary says as well as our overall passage summary. So that is the best answer. The other ones could be tempting as well, right? Develop methods for classifying unusual organisms. No, they did the exact opposite. They continued their preconceived notions. Accepted that nature could be inconsistent. They loved order. They wanted it to just be order, 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 right? And then again, we can look at the question, right? The Darwin scholars treat anomalies as puzzles to be reconciled, most reasonably interpreted to mean that they had not. So that would say they had not accepted that nature could be inconsistent. A part of it is true, but also that sentence, this sentence in the paragraph is saying consider that the anomalies might contradict their fundamental assumption. And again, that's what our summaries are saying. Okay. We'll go through these next ones a little quicker because we are getting the hang of the passage and we know what the main idea is. So your author's assertion that the ancient Renaissance and Enlightenment, we read that somewhere, so we know where to look if we need to, attempt to study life empirically is a concession meant to acknowledge the value of earlier works despite its limitation. An exaggeration intended to highlight Darwin's genius. This sounds like a good to me, so I would have just picked this and move on. But, you can never be too hasty because there could be a better answer. So we'll just go through those. Exaggeration intended to highlight Darwin's genius by contrast. No, the paragraph talked about how attempts had been made to study it. An example of the author's skepticism towards historical records. I didn't see any skeptical words in that discussion. I did see correct in quotation marks, so that could be attractive. But the main reason that the author included the Renaissance and Enlightenment biology was to say that attempts had been made to understand life before, right? So that it's just acknowledging past attempts. Irrelevant to the main argument of the passage, it's not. They're literally talking about his predecessors. So A is a better answer. Do not try to justify why something is the right answer. Please focus on also trying to justify why something is the wrong answer, and the right answer will be the only one standing. Okay? It can most recently be concluded from the passage that Darwin's work exerted a powerful influence. Oh, the last paragraph says it changed how we're looking at biology, right? It was transformative, it was new. And so the answer would be one that says exactly what I just said. Replace religious explanation. Nowhere did we talk about religion. So these are the keywords that you need to look out for. It didn't talk about religion anywhere. Why would you pick religious, right? Cross it out. Don't even read the rest of it. Incorporated variations and adaptations into a unified naturalistic framework. Maybe, that sounds good. It sounds like something I just said. In our summaries, we have natural process as is. Paragraph 4 says Darwin said no more interpretation, just natural processes. Sounds good to me. Again, rejected all prior observation of natural history. He did not reject them, he just accepted the anomalies as they were, as they would show up to an impartial observer, right? So also these keywords, all, rejected all, that sounds so harsh, and he didn't do any of that. Emphasize the classification of species above else. He did not do that. No. He just said, anomalies exist, things are as they are, B is right, we'll keep moving. Okay, now our big reasoning beyond text. I'm sorry this is going on a little too long, but if it were discovered that Darwin's ideas about natural explanations were heavily influenced by another contemporary artist, right? So the whole passage said he was the first one, right? He was the first one to do this. It had never, here, I'll show you right now. It had never occurred to anyone to interpret the living world in such a rigorous, naturalistic way. So then suddenly, somebody's already done it. Someone has already published something or whatever. So this would challenge the contention that Darwin was the first one. So we'll pick that. Alter the content and posture of biology towards the living world. Probably, but if he was the first one to publish it or whatever, then he still altered it, even if it was heavily influenced by somebody. Right here was the first one to rigorously avoid pre-existing interpretive frameworks. This is obviously correct, and we're not even going to try and justify the other ones. Contribute to the development of modern evolutionary thought? No. Reviewed variation as an obstacle to scientific explanation? Also no. And it is very important to answer the question, right? The question is asking if Darwin, and this is what I mean, like let's say you're not understanding the question. Paraphrase it. In your head, restate the question. If Darwin took inspo from somewhere else, then what? Then he's not the first one to do it. Somebody else already did it. And that would challenge the contention that Darwin was the first one to rigorously avoid pre-existing interpretive frameworks. Okay. We'll do question 7, which is the author's comparison of a map to conceptual frameworks used by pre-Darwinism scholars, or Darwinian scholars, is most likely to intend to show, so map to conceptual frameworks, to show that such frameworks, so in the passage, it said, map, simplify. So even, we can also just go back. We've highlighted. So here it says, just as a map can impose neat boundaries upon a landscape whose contours are jagged and shifting, these intellectual devices imposed order when nature offered none. So it is simplifying what nature is offering, right? So jagged. So if the terrain is like this, but the map shows it like that, it is not accurately showing what the terrain is like. And the answer that matches that most is B. Impose artificial order that may not reflect the true nature of what is studied. We just said that. If it's mountains and if it's plains being shown, that's not what's actually there. And that's exactly what the frameworks did. They did not show nature as is, and they just did what the frameworks would, or they just showed what the frameworks would describe as well, right? Make reality more accessible by simplifying it. That is again very tempting, right? They're trying to simplify reality, but is it making it more accessible? No. Serves as useful tools for navigating complexity without distorting it. That they are distorting it, but serves as tool for navigating. These keywords will think, "Oh, that sounds like a map. I'll pick that." But that's not what the question is asking, right? What is the frameworks? What are the frameworks doing? They're imposing artificial order. That's what our that's what our passage summary is saying too. Frameworks to correct, love order. That's exactly what our summary said. Help scientists better appreciate the irregularities in nature. They're not appreciating it, they are simplifying it. So B is obviously correct. Okay, and now we're on question 8, and this is the hardest type of question for me. It is a reasoning beyond text, but it's like the would the author agree, disagree, neither agree or disagree kind of question, and this always trips me out. So in this one, I always just look at my summary, what was the thesis of the passage, and we'll answer based on that, right? So, if a 21st century researcher argued that observing genetic mutations, the passage didn't talk about genetic mutations, so I'm going to kind of keep that in mind and we'll keep going. Observing genetic mutations over a short time scale provides the clearest evidence for evolution. So, the whole passage talked about, it's kind of whack. Oh my gosh. Um, The whole passage talked about how Darwin revolutionized how we looked at evolution. So passage theme, we'll keep that in mind, is Darwin change. I just use this symbol for change every time. Changed evolutionary approach. So this is saying, well, the 21st century is saying is genetic mutation provides clearest evidence for evolution. So the author wouldn't really like agree or disagree with that, so I won't pick A or B, but let's also just read it. The author would agree since Darwin also focused on variation as a driver of change. While true that Darwin emphasized variation, the author never suggests that the variation alone is the clearest or only evidence, right? So the author wouldn't technically agree with this, and the author's stance is broader. It's focused on unbiased framework. We're looking at things as is. Unbiased framework. Okay, so that's our passage theme. So we'll eliminate A. B, the author would disagree, insisting that long-term fossil evidence is more reliable. Okay, that's just plain wrong. Okay, they didn't talk about, oh my goodness, they didn't talk about fossil evidence, so we're not going to look at that. The author would neither disagree or agree, since the passage doesn't discuss genetic mutation. If I'm on a time crunch, I would have picked this and moved on. But even though mutations aren't explicitly discussed, the author's reasoning style needs to be applied because this is a reasoning beyond text. The author's reasoning style is that we want unbiased frameworks. Okay? And so the author would likely integrate this evidence into the broader framework, right, rather than remaining neutral. So even though it's not discussing genetic mutation, this is saying that observing genetic mutation provides the clearest evidence for evolution. So if that was shown, then the author would argue that such evidence, while useful, may still be interpreted within the broader naturalistic framework. So the author's talking about these frameworks, the author's talking about how we're looking at biological evolution, so we'll pick that because that is accurate with our breakdown. Okay, that concludes our cars passage breakdown. I apologize for how long it was, but I do want it to be comprehensive. You can always email me for additional questions or any other tutoring help that you need. Thank you.